My name doesn't matter much anymore. Most of the men I served with are long gone. But back in 1943, I was a chief motor machinist's mate aboard one of the smallest warships ever built, a 77-foot PT boat, made of wood, armed to the teeth, and faster than anything else on the water. They called us the Mosquito Fleet. We weren't battleships, we weren't carriers. We were tiny, loud, and fragile. A single burst of machine gun fire could rip us apart. But we were hunters, prowling through the Pacific nights, waiting for the enemy to show themselves. The Japanese never expected us. They had their grand battleships and cruisers. We had plywood, gasoline, and guts. And somehow, that was enough. Our mission was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and vanish. We launched torpedoes at transports, ambushed convoys near enemy islands, and slipped away before dawn. The Navy didn't expect much from us at first. We were experimental, even laughed at by the big ship officers. But by the end of the war, our little boats would change how the Japanese Navy thought about the sea. I still remember the first time we saw one of our boats in full throttle engines, screaming, rooster tail flying 40 feet high. The officer beside me said, "If we ever meet the enemy, God help them." He was right. But what we didn't know then was that the enemy would come to fear us. Fear the sound of our engines in the dark, more than they feared any battleship. That's where our story begins, in the restless, black waters of the Solomon Islands, where shadows moved faster than radar could track. Our first real fight came off the coast of New Georgia in the summer of 1943. The moon was high, the water flat as glass, and the air thick with diesel and fear. We'd been told that a small Japanese convoy was moving supplies to their garrisons on the islands. For destroyers, maybe a transport or two. We were 3 PT boats, little shadows against an ocean that belonged to the enemy. Each of us carried 4 torpedoes, a couple of .50 caliber machine guns, and a crew that barely topped a dozen men. That was it. No armor, no radar worth a damn, just nerves and speed. Our skipper, Lieutenant Bill Harrison, crouched behind the wheel, scanning the darkness through binoculars. He'd been a college kid just a year earlier. Now he was hunting destroyers twice the size of our whole squadron. At 0200, our radar operator whispered, "Contacts bearing 110, 2 miles." We cut our engines to idle. The night went quiet. All we could hear was the slap of waves against the hull. Then we saw them. Long, dark silhouettes sliding across the horizon. Japanese destroyers, their decks faintly lit by the glow of cigarettes and engine sparks. They didn't know we were there. "Ready tubes, 1 through 4, Harrison ordered. The torpedo men crouched over the launch tubes, sweating in silence. I watched my hands shake as I tightened a fuel line, not from cold, but from knowing what we were about to do. At 1,000 yards, we opened the throttles. The Packard engines roared to life, the boat leaping forward like a wild animal. Our wakes glowed white behind us as we fired 4 torpedoes streaking through the water, toward the destroyers. Seconds later, the ocean lit up. A massive explosion tore through the night. One of the destroyers had been hit dead center. Fire climbed skyward, silhouetting the others as they scrambled to respond. We turned hard to port, engines screaming, as Japanese shells crashed into the water around us. Their searchlights stabbed through the darkness, looking for ghosts. But we were already gone. That night, the Japanese Navy learned that small didn't mean weak. And we learned that fear disappears the moment the shooting starts. Between battles, life aboard a PT boat was a strange mix of boredom, sweat, and tension. You'd go days without seeing the enemy, yet never stop looking over your shoulder. We were always either hunting or hiding. Nothing in between. Our boat, PT 2157, was barely big enough for 12 men. Inside the cabin, it smelled of diesel, salt, and fear. The Packard engines took up half the space, roaring so loud you could feel them in your bones. We slept where we could, some on deck, some beside ammunition crates. One guy always curled up beside the torpedo tubes. Meals were cold rations if we were lucky, rainwater if we weren't. Sometimes we'd pull into a hidden cove to refuel or make repairs. No docks, no bases, just a few palm trees and barrels dropped by a Navy tender. We'd swim, shave, clean the guns, and wait for the next order that would send us back into the dark. There wasn't much rank out there either. A lieutenant commanded the boat, sure. But when you're running on fumes at midnight and a destroyer's shells are landing 20 yards away, everyone's equal. You fought as brothers, or you didn't fight at all. We kept photos of home, taped above the engine panels. Wives, girlfriends, kids. They got soaked, faded, but never came down. One night, a new kid named Eddie, barely 19, asked me if I thought we'd make it through the war. I told him the truth. We'll make it through tonight. That's enough. The truth was, none of us knew how long we'd last. Every mission could be your last. Every explosion in the distance could mean a friend's boat didn't come back. But when we were out there, engines roaring, spray hitting our faces, the stars reflecting off the water, there was nothing like it. You weren't afraid. You were alive. And out in those black waters, speed was life. It was late August 1943 when word spread through the islands that one of our own hadn't come back. A PT boat patrolling near Blackett Strait had been cut clean in two by a Japanese destroyer. The boat's number was PT-109. At first, no one believed it. A destroyer running down one of us. It sounded impossible. But by the next morning, the radio silence told the truth. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy and his crew were missing. We knew Jack. Everyone in the squadron did. He wasn't the politician the world would later know. Just another skipper, tall, quiet, and fearless. He'd often come by our dock to bum cigarettes or swap parts. He had a grin that made the men trust him instantly. When we finally heard the story, it chilled us. The destroyer Imagiri had appeared out of the dark at full speed. No lights, no warning. One moment the sea was calm. The next it exploded in white water and steel. PT-109 was sliced in half. 2 men died instantly. The rest clung to wreckage for hours before Kennedy led them, swimming miles through the black water to a tiny island. For days, the Navy didn't know if any had survived. We scoured the straits by night, scanning the moonlight for a flare, a life vest, anything. Finally, word came back. Kennedy and most of his crew were alive, rescued by island scouts and coast watchers. It was the kind of story that spread fast through every PT base in the Pacific. Not because of who he was, but because it reminded us all of how thin the line was between glory and death. After that, we started painting little shark's teeth on our bows, not for luck, but for memory. Each tooth stood for a boat that hadn't come home. Every time we throttled up after that, we remembered PT-109 and how quickly a calm sea could turn into a grave. After PT-109, the war around the Solomon Islands only got fiercer. The Japanese were desperate to keep their troops supplied, and we were ordered to stop them no matter the cost. They called their supply runs the Tokyo Express. Fast destroyers loaded with drums of fuel, ammo, and food, racing down the slot under the cover of darkness. Our job was to intercept them, and that meant running headfirst into destroyers that could flatten us with one lucky hit. Most nights started the same. A radio whisper from command, Tokyo Express expected near Columbangra. Midnight, we'd gear up, check the torpedoes, and head into the black. The engines howled so loud we couldn't hear ourselves think, but once the hunt began, no one spoke. I remember one night, August 28, 1943. The air was heavy and still. Our radar picked up contacts. 3 large ships moving fast. Japanese destroyers, no question. We throttled down to creep closer, barely above idle, our wake disappearing into the moonlight. At 1,500 yards, our skipper gave the order. Fire tubes, 1 through 4. The boat rocked as each torpedo left the launch. Seconds later, the horizon erupted. One of the destroyers took a hit. Its forward deck vanished in a fireball. But we didn't get to celebrate. The others opened fire instantly. Shells screamed overhead, tracer rounds slicing the darkness. The water exploded around us as we turned hard to escape. Splinters of wood flew from the hull. One shell hit so close it lifted the stern clear out of the water. By some miracle, we made it out. A few holes, a few burns, but still afloat. Another boat in our squadron wasn't so lucky, PT-121, vanished in the chaos, never found. When we got back to base at dawn, we were covered in smoke and salt, too tired to speak. But inside, every man knew he'd just looked death in the face and lived. That was the thing about the PT boats. We were small, but the sea always made room for us. After months of fighting, the Pacific had a way of wearing a man down, not just from the enemy, but from the sea itself. The days were boiling hot, the nights endless and wet. Salt ate through everything, our clothes, our weapons, even our skin. You could tell a PT sailor by the burns on his arms and the oil under his nails. We lived soaked in sweat and fuel, sleeping beside engines that never stopped trembling. We learned to tell storms by smell and danger by silence. Out there, the sea had moods. Some nights it was calm as glass. Other nights it rolled like it wanted to swallow you whole. More than once, we lost boats, not to bullets, but to the ocean, flipped in typhoons, crushed against reefs, or lost in fog so thick you couldn't see the bow from the cockpit. What kept us going wasn't orders or medals, it was each other. We were brothers, men who had seen too much, and laughed about it anyway. When one of us went down, the rest didn't sleep until we knew he was home or gone for good. Our mechanic, Red Harris, used to say, "We're the only idiots crazy enough to fight battles in a canoe." He'd grin, then dive back into the engine room. Guys like him kept the boat alive, patching holes with scrap, welding plates while shells whistled overhead. But it wasn't all misery. There were moments of quiet, drifting under a full moon, the ocean glowing with phosphorescence, every wave trailing light. In those rare moments, it felt like the world had stopped fighting. Still, none of us fooled ourselves. The Japanese were dug in deep across the islands, and command had bigger plans coming. Word spread that soon we'd be moving north, toward New Guinea, and maybe even the Philippines. We didn't know it yet, but the worst and the most heroic missions were still ahead. By early 1944, we were ordered north toward New Guinea. The Navy had started building new PT bases along the coast, hidden fuel depots, camouflaged docks, and tents cut right into the jungle. It was humid, crawling with insects, and it smelled like rot and gasoline. But from those outposts, we could reach deeper into Japanese waters than ever before. That's when the enemy started calling us the ghosts of the sea. They'd hear our engines at night, roaring suddenly out of the black, and by the time their guns swung around, we were gone. Some reports even said their captains believed American PT boats were invisible. Our missions changed to we weren't just hunting ships anymore. We ran supply runs to stranded Marines, evacuated downed pilots, and slipped behind enemy lines to deliver scouts or spies. We were no longer just attackers. We were lifelines. I remember one mission off the coast of Sami. We had to sneak close to shore, under the cliffs where Japanese spotlights swept the water. The jungle was alive with gunfire, tracer rounds crisscrossing the beach. We shut the engines down and drifted with the current, silent as driftwood. You could hear your heart beat louder than the waves. When we reached the pickup point, a signal lamp blinked twice from the trees. Our men. We hauled them aboard for Marines, filthy and half-starved, clutching their rifles like ghosts themselves. Within seconds, the jungle erupted. Japanese machine guns opened fire from the tree line, rounds smacking into the water all around us. We slammed the throttles forward, the boat leaping like a scared animal. The engines screamed, bullets whizzed, but somehow we made it past the reef. The men we'd rescued never stopped thanking us. But the truth was, we were just glad to still be breathing. That's how it was. Every mission was a gamble. You didn't win, you survived. And survival was victory enough. The Japanese weren't fools. By mid-1944, they'd learned to fear us and to fight back. The more successful our raids became, the more they started sending out patrol ships, float planes, and armed barges just to track and destroy us. We used to say the sea had eyes. You could be creeping along the coast, silent and invisible, and suddenly the night would erupt in gunfire, tracers carving orange lines through the dark. Sometimes it was a single patrol ship, sometimes 3 destroyers. One night, near Hollandia, we were ambushed. Our radar picked up nothing, but suddenly, the sky lit up with searchlights. We'd stumbled right into a trap. The Japanese had strung out barges in a crescent formation, waiting for us to come through. The first burst of machine gun fire hit the deck, shattering the helm glass. Our skipper ducked, blood on his cheek, yelling, "Hard to starboard." We swung wide, the hull screaming as splinters flew. Our bow gunner opened up with twin 50s, cutting through the traces. I could see the silhouettes of the barges, now flat, armored, spitting fire. We fired one torpedo just to clear a path. It hit something, maybe a barge, maybe the shoreline, and the explosion blew the jungle apart. By the time the smoke cleared, the sea was boiling. Oil, fire, and debris floated past us as we tore out of there at full throttle. One engine was gone, the deck was scorched, but we were alive. That's when it hit me. We weren't untouchable anymore. The Japanese were adapting, laying traps, baiting us with decoy barges, even dropping flares from planes to mark our position. Every time we went out, it felt like rolling dice with the devil. Still, we didn't stop. You couldn't show fear in front of the men. Every mission started the same way: a quiet prayer, a clenched jaw, and a whisper from the skipper. "Let's go wake the enemy." And every night, we did. By the summer of 1944, the PT boats weren't the same fragile wooden craft that had first gone to war. We were evolving, faster, meaner, and smarter. The Navy started fitting our boats with new radar sets, rocket launchers, and heavier guns. What once was a hit-and-run nuisance had turned into a true fighting ship. The old Elco and Higgins models still ran on gasoline, but the tech crews in the rear lines were geniuses. They stripped every ounce of weight that wasn't needed, tuned the Packard engines till they howled like thunder, and wired in radar so sharp we could see a sandbar before our eyes ever caught it. We learned new tricks, too. Instead of attacking straight on, we'd split into wolf packs, 3 boats fanning out across a bay, one drawing fire while the others slipped around for a perfect shot. Some nights we carried small teams of Marine raiders, dropping them behind Japanese lines, then racing back through mine-filled shallows to pick them up before dawn. And then came the rocket's 24 launch tubes, bolted right onto the deck. Crude, dangerous, but devastating. We could rake an entire beach or convoy line before the enemy even knew we were there. The first time we fired them, the skipper yelled, "Holy hell, we've got our own artillery." Every upgrade made us bolder. The Japanese started calling us Sea Hornets. One intelligence report we saw after the war said their sailors were more afraid of PT boats than submarines, because we came out of nowhere. Of course, with more firepower came more risk. The new gear weighed us down. One bad turn, and you could roll the boat in heavy surf. We lost as many to accidents as to gunfire. But no one complained. Every man wanted more speed, more range, more bite. By now, we knew the endgame was coming. We were pushing toward the Philippines, toward the Big Islands, and everyone said the Japanese would defend them like sacred ground. We didn't know it yet, but our little fleet of plywood killers was about to join the largest naval invasion in history. By October 1944, the sea off the Philippines was alive with ships, more vessels than I'd ever seen in my life. Battleships, cruisers, carriers, transports, all converging on one purpose: take back the islands. And somewhere among that floating armada were a few dozen of us, the PT boats, tiny specks of wood and gasoline, surrounded by steel giants. We were assigned to Leyte Gulf, our mission simple but deadly: scout ahead of the main fleet, intercept Japanese barges, and protect the invasion beaches from nighttime surprise attacks. The brass called us eyes and daggers. We called ourselves bait. The first night before the landings, the horizon looked like the end of the world. Every ship was firing tracer rounds, flares, anti-aircraft bursts, painting the sky red. The air shook with the thunder of naval guns, as shells screamed overhead toward the coast. And yet, out in that chaos, we moved quietly, throttled down, listening for engines that didn't belong. Our radar picked up faint returns, a cluster of small contacts moving fast toward the Gulf. We slipped into intercept position. As we drew closer, we saw them through the dark Japanese landing barges, loaded with troops, trying to reinforce the beachhead. Range, 1,200 yards, our radar man whispered. The skipper nodded. Fire. Torpedoes streaked out, leaving faint trails of phosphorescent wake. The first hit dead on, a blinding flash, then chaos. Barges burning, men shouting in the distance. We turned hard, spraying the rest with .50 cal fire as we passed. The sea was a mirror of flame. That night we sank 5 barges, the next 2 more. We barely slept. Between attacks, we refueled from tankers by moonlight, patched our hulls with spare planks, and went back out. The landings went forward. We watched the beaches fill with Marines and Army soldiers, their transports unloading in perfect rhythm. Overhead, the sky was thick with American planes. For the first time, it felt like the ocean, our ocean, belonged to us again. But the Japanese weren't done yet. Radio intercepts warned of something huge coming from the west, their entire fleet. Heading for Leyte, we didn't know it then, but we were about to witness the largest naval battle in history. The Battle of Leyte Gulf hit like the sky was falling. On the night of October 24, 1944, every ship, plane, and gun from both sides seemed to open up at once. The horizon flashed with explosions. Tracer lines crisscrossed the dark, and the sea shook beneath our hull. We'd been ordered to patrol near the entrance to Surigao Strait, the narrow passage the Japanese fleet would have to take to reach our invasion forces. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew the truth. We were the first line of defense. Wooden boats against battleships. Our radar started lighting up like Christmas. Big, fast contacts. Dozens of them. Japanese battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, steaming full speed into the strait. You could almost feel the weight of it through the water. Our skipper turned to the crew and said, "We're not stopping them, we're just warning the big boys." But that didn't mean we wouldn't shoot first. We throttled forward, 3 PT boats in formation. As we broke through the mist, the shapes came into view, towering hulls, searchlights sweeping. We launched our torpedoes and peeled away, engines screaming. Seconds later, the world exploded. One torpedo struck a cruiser dead amidships. Another detonated near a destroyer's stern. The Japanese opened fire with everything they had. Shells, tracers, even star shells, lighting up the sky like daylight. The ocean boiled around us as shells tore the water to foam. We zigzagged hard, spraying our wake with machine gun fire to confuse their aim. The air smelled like cordite and burning oil. One of our sister boats, PT Antigua, was hit, gone in an instant, just a flash and a roar. We didn't have time to mourn. We turned again, fired our last 2 torpedoes, and ran full speed through smoke so thick you could taste it. Over the radio, we heard the call signs of other PTs, doing the same, dozens of us slashing in and out of the Japanese formation, forcing them to turn, scatter, slow down. By the time the sun rose, the trap had closed. American destroyers and battleships waiting in the strait opened fire with radar-guided salvos. The Japanese fleet never made it through. They called it the last stand of the Imperial Navy. For us, it was just another night of survival. One more dawn we didn't expect to see. When dawn broke over Surigao Strait, the sea was littered with wreckage, burning oil slicks, shattered lifeboats, and the ghosts of what had been one of the greatest naval armadas Japan ever sent to sea. We slowed our engines and drifted through the smoke. Pieces of hull plating floated past, twisted like paper. Now and then, a helmet, a sandal, a photograph, someone's life reduced to debris. The smell of burning fuel clung to everything. I remember one of our gunners standing silent at the bow, watching a Japanese sailor clinging to a plank. Without a word, he tossed him a rope. Nobody cheered, nobody cursed. The war felt far away and too close all at once. The radio crackled with reports. Yamashiro sunk, Fuso gone, destroyers wiped out. The Japanese fleet that had roared into the strait hours ago was now just smoke on the horizon. We'd helped stop them, but the cost was steep. Half a dozen PT boats never came back. Back at the tender ship, we refueled and rearmed in silence. The crew barely spoke. One man just sat staring at his mug of coffee, the same cup he'd used since New Guinea. He kept rubbing the handle like a charm. Later that afternoon, as the fires still burned across the gulf, I climbed onto deck and looked west. The sea was calm again, too calm. For the first time, I realized how small our boats truly were. Wooden shells held together by willpower and luck, facing steel monsters that could crush us in a second. But we had done our job. The invasion of Leyte was safe. And somewhere in that smoke and fire, the tide of the Pacific War had turned for good. That night, I wrote one line in my log. We lived through hell. But hell ran out of fuel before we did. After Surigao, our orders shifted. No more defending. Now we were hunting. The Japanese Navy was broken, but not beaten. Their supply lines were still alive, faint and fragile, like dying veins, pumping the last drops of fuel and ammo to their stranded armies. We patrolled off Luzon, creeping through black waters where the moon barely reached. Radar sweeps lit our screens with faint blips, tiny cargo ships, wooden schooners, or sometimes nothing but sea clutter. But every once in a while, one of those blips turned into a burning silhouette. They called them ghost convoys. Ragged transports, escorted by desperate destroyers, trying to sneak through the islands under cover of night. We'd strike fast, throttles wide open, engines screaming, firing spreads of torpedoes before the enemy even knew what hit them. Then we'd vanish into the dark again. I can still feel the vibration of the deck when we launched a torpedo. The boat shuddered, and 5 seconds later, the horizon would erupt into a column of fire. Sometimes it wasn't even clear who we were hitting. Everything was confusion and smoke. Tracer fire stitching across the water. One night, we ran into a Japanese barge convoy near Ormoc Bay. They opened up with 25mm guns, shredding the air. I remember ducking behind the turret, watching the sea boil with green tracers. We returned fire. The twin .50s roared until the barrels glowed. The barges burned one by one, their fuel drums exploding in bright orange flashes that lit our faces like ghosts. By dawn, all that was left were blackened hulls, drifting in silence. We circled once to make sure no survivors were shooting, then slipped back toward the coastline. Every mission felt the same, quick, brutal, over before your heartbeat slowed. We were fighting shadows now, and the shadows were getting thinner by the day. The brass called it strangling Japan's lifelines. To us, it felt like watching an enemy drown, slow, inevitable, and somehow tragic. By early 1945, the war had changed. The Japanese no longer came at us with fleets. They came with desperation. They called them Shinyo boats, tiny, fast, suicide craft packed with explosives, designed to ram our PTs. We first heard about them from radio chatter. Floating bombs, someone said. We laughed at first, until the night we met them. It was just after midnight near Manila Bay. The radar showed a swarm of small targets racing toward us. Too small for destroyers, too fast for barges. We thought they were fishing boats, until one of them exploded against a minesweeper half a mile away. The shockwave hit us like a punch to the chest. Then came the flashes, white wakes darting through the black water, zigzagging straight for us. Every gun on the deck opened up at once. Tracers carved the night. The smell of cordite filled the air. I saw one suicide boat get hit mid-charge. It vanished in a sheet of flame so bright, I could see every man on our deck, frozen in the light. We shot down 3, maybe 4, but one got close, too close. The explosion threw spray high over the bridge, drenching us in salt and smoke. My ears rang for days. When the sea settled, only wreckage remained. The next morning, we found pieces of their boats scattered along the shore. No armor, no fuel tanks, just plywood, an engine, and a detonator. I remember staring at the tiny cockpit and thinking, someone had sat in there, knowing they would never come back. We stopped joking about floating bombs after that. From then on, every night felt like a gamble. Would we catch them before they reached us, or would one slip through? War had become personal. There was no strategy left, just survival. After those suicide boat attacks, everything changed in how we fought. The brass issued new orders. Keep moving, never stop. And if radar showed anything smaller than a barge, shoot first and ask later. We learned to listen to the sea. You could tell a Shinyo by the sound, that uneven high-pitched whine of an engine pushed to its limits. The moment we heard it, floodlights went on, and every .50 cal opened up. The ocean turned white with foam and tracer fire. We modified our PT boats too. We stacked extra armor plates near the cockpit, doubled up on machine guns, and even mounted 20mm cannons, scavenged from wrecked planes. Some crews welded on extra fuel drums for range. Others strapped depth charges to the sides. We looked more like pirates than Navy men. Our tactics evolved. Instead of patrolling wide, we ran in tight wolf packs, 3 or 4 boats sweeping together, overlapping arcs of fire, covering each other's blind spots. We started using radar decoys, floating empty barrels with reflectors to confuse the enemy. The suicide boats came fewer and fewer after February, but the tension never left. Every splash, every radar echo could mean death. Nights blurred into each other. We lived on black coffee and nerves. Then one dawn, off Cavite, we stumbled upon the wrecks of half a dozen Shinyos, still floating, their engines riddled with holes. For the first time, I felt like we had turned their own desperation against them. But the victory didn't feel clean. These weren't fleets or soldiers anymore. They were kids. Farm boys sent out on one-way missions. We respected their courage, even as we destroyed them. That's the strange truth about war. Sometimes you salute the enemy as you fire. By March, command told us Japan's navy was finished. But for us, the war wasn't over. There were still islands to clear, convoys to burn, and men to save. By spring of 1945, word spread through the fleet. The Philippines were being liberated. For months, we'd fought along those jagged coastlines, from Leyte to Luzon, dodging air raids and ambushes. But now, the tide had turned for good. When the first American infantry flags went up over Manila, you could feel the relief across the entire bay. We were still out on night patrol when the signal came through. Manila secured. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of our gunners, a farm kid from Ohio, whispered, "Maybe we get to go home after all." Our orders shifted again. Less combat, more escort. We ferried wounded soldiers from the beaches, hauled supplies, even towed crippled ships back to safety. The PT boats, once hunters, became lifelines. I remember one run to Mindoro, towing a damaged LST. The deck was filled with Marines too hurt to move. We gave them our water, our coffee, even tore shirts for bandages. The ocean was calm that day, and for once, no gunfire echoed across it. It almost felt like peace. But reminders of the war were everywhere. Burned villages along the coast, wrecks still smoking inland, and the smell, a mix of fuel, mud, and loss. Locals waved as we passed, children smiling with what little they had left. One night, we anchored off Corregidor, the same fortress that had fallen in 42. Now it was ours again. The cliffs were silent, except for the wind. Our skipper ordered the engines off, and we just drifted there, under the stars. For a moment, we could almost hear the ghosts of the men who never got to see that flag rise again. When the message came that MacArthur had returned, it wasn't just a headline, it was a promise kept. The Pacific was ours now, but no one cheered. We were too tired, too changed. Still, in that silence, we all knew the end was finally within reach. By the summer of 1945, the war had become a waiting game. Japan's empire was collapsing, but no one dared to breathe easy. Our PT squadron was moved north, toward Borneo, and later, to the waters off Okinawa, escorting convoys and intercepting the last, desperate Japanese ships trying to slip through the blockade. We knew it was nearly over, but that didn't make it safer. The air was thick with kamikazes now. Every sunset brought dread. We'd watch the horizon and see tiny specks diving out of the clouds, heading straight for the larger ships. The sky would bloom with tracer fire and explosions, and sometimes a carrier or transport would vanish in a single flash. For us PT boys, the mission never changed. Get close, hit fast, and get out. We hunted down suicide boats, torpedo barges, and whatever was left of Japan's shattered convoys. Sometimes we'd find them stranded, out of fuel, drifting. They'd wave white flags, and we'd circle cautiously, guns ready, but hearts uneasy. One night, near Zombo-anga, we found a Japanese destroyer run aground on a reef. Half its crew was gone. The rest refused to surrender, even when surrounded. We stood off and watched as our gunfire finished her. The explosion was blinding, a final roar from a navy that refused to die quietly. Back at base, you could sense the war's final breath. New guys showed up, fresh faces who'd never fired a shot. We veterans looked at them with a kind of pity. They'd trained for a war that was already ending. I remember one morning, our skipper reading aloud the casualty reports from Okinawa, tens of thousands dead on both sides. He folded the paper slowly and said, "If this is victory, it sure feels a lot like loss." We didn't know it then, but in just a few weeks, the world would change forever, with 2 flashes of light that would end the war and redefine what destruction meant. It was early August when we got the news. The radio operator burst out of the cabin shouting. They dropped a bomb, a single bomb, and wiped out an entire city. We thought he was joking. We'd seen cities burn before, Manila, Tokyo, but the way he said it didn't sound like firebombing. He said, "1 bomb." We gathered around the static-filled radio, listening as the announcer tried to describe the unimaginable. Hiroshima, gone. Days later, another broadcast, Nagasaki, destroyed the same way. No one spoke. Even our skipper just stared at the deck. We had fought for years to survive torpedoes, kamikazes, and storms. But this was different. This was the end of war, by means none of us could understand. A week later, the word came. Japan had surrendered. Just like that. No invasion, no final battle. Only silence. The sea was calm that morning. We drifted on still water under a blazing sun, and for the first time, there was no mission, no target, no enemy. Some of the crew cheered, others cried quietly. A few just sat down, staring at the horizon as if expecting more orders. After years of running, shooting, and surviving, none of us knew what to do with peace. That night, we gathered on deck. Someone played an old harmonica, and we passed around a can of coffee like it was whiskey. The stars were bright, the air warm. I remember thinking this must be what home feels like. Later, the skipper raised a mug and said softly, "To the ones who didn't make it home. They get peace first." We drank in silence. The ocean stretched around us, endless and dark, but for once, it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like freedom. When the war ended, the ocean suddenly felt empty. No more missions, no more orders, no more radio chatter filled with code words and coordinates. Just waves, wind, and the hum of engines running out the clock. Our PT boat, once our home, our shield, our weapon, was stripped down piece by piece. The Navy had hundreds of them, and they didn't need them anymore. Some were burned on the beaches to save the cost of shipping them home. Watching those wooden hulls, boats that had carried us through hell, go up in flames, was harder than I expected. It felt like saying goodbye to a friend. They sent us back to the States in groups. No parade, no speeches, just a handshake, a duffel bag, and a train ticket. I remember stepping off the transport ship in San Francisco, the air full of noise and laughter. Civilians waving flags, kids cheering. But all I could think about were the faces that didn't come back. Home didn't feel like home at first. The nights were too quiet. I'd wake up expecting to hear engines or the rattle of .50 cals. Instead, there was only silence. Sometimes I'd dream of the ocean, the phosphorescent wake, the smell of oil and salt, and wake up wishing I was back out there, even if it meant danger. Some of the boys joined the merchant marine. Others couldn't bear to touch a boat again. As for me, I kept a small piece of tick deck from our PT. I still have it, cracked and weathered. Whenever I hold it, I can hear the roar of those engines again, and for a moment, I'm back under that vast Pacific sky. War gives you brothers you never asked for, and memories you'll never escape. But it also teaches you what matters: life, loyalty, and the sound of peace after too much noise. Years later, when I think about the war, I don't remember the explosions or the gunfire first. I remember the silence that came afterward. The quiet hum of the engines, idling under a starlit sky. The glow of cigarettes on the deck. The faces of the men beside me, young, fearless, and already half ghosts. Sometimes people ask me what it was like, serving on a PT boat. I tell them it was like living on a knife's edge. Every wave could hide death. Every night could be your last. But I also tell them this: I've never felt more alive. We were just kids, really farm boys, mechanics, fishermen, thrown together on fragile wooden boats, and somehow we changed the course of the Pacific War. We weren't heroes, we were survivors, and survival was enough. When I visit the coast now, I still look out to sea and listen. The waves sound the same as they did in 1944. Sometimes, if the wind's right, I can almost hear the rumble of Packard engines and the rattle of the guns. Most of the boys I served with are gone now, buried in quiet places, far from the water. But a part of them will always be out there, riding those endless waves under the moon, forever young, forever fearless. I once carved a line into my logbook after the war ended. I didn't know why at the time, but it still feels true today. The sea keeps her secrets, but she remembers her sons. Every man who ever rowed those boats, who faced the darkness and came back, left a piece of himself behind. And as long as the ocean moves, so will their story.